Habit is the great wheel of society, its most precious conservative agent. It alone secures our dignity, our virtues, and our stability. Without it, men would be wholly creatures of caprice, prone to every whim of the moment, incapable of constancy or perseverance. If there is one thing more than another which psychology should impress upon the general mind, it is the fact that habit is the enormous wheel of human nature, the ballast which enables the ship to steer steadily upon the seas of life. It is the very cement of our character, the invisible scaffolding upon which our actions are built and to which our thoughts must conform. In analyzing its significance, we find that habit is the very foundation of our being, the indispensable condition of education, of civilization, of morality itself. What is habit? It is the tendency of a living creature to repeat its acts, to return to its previous modes of conduct, to conserve in movement an idea what has once been performed. It is not mere routine, nor mechanical drill, though it partakes of both. It is rather the law that the nervous system is plastic, and that paths, once trodden, are easier for the tread of subsequent footsteps. The child who stammers through the alphabet at first finds his task bewildering. But as each letter grows familiar, as the order becomes repeated, the performance gains smoothness until at last it flows with the inevitableness of a stream running in its channel. The same is true of every activity of man, the labor of the artisan, the practice of the musician, the calculations of the mathematician. All rest upon the fact that impressions repeated engrave themselves in the nervous system until resistance vanishes and the act becomes second nature. The nervous tissue is in this respect unlike any other matter we know. Iron and stone are fixed in form, but the living brain retains plasticity, which is to say it can acquire new paths, strengthen them by use, and lose them by disuse. It is this wonderful property which permits education and growth, which allows us to be molded by experience. A habit once rooted in the nervous system becomes the line of least resistance, the channel through which currents flow with the least expenditure of force. Thus habit economizes effort, diminishes fatigue, and enables the higher faculties to be freed from trivial care. A man who has learned to write no longer thinks of the separate letters. The act is automatic, and his thought may wander elsewhere. Without this automatism, our consciousness would be overwhelmed by the multiplicity of details, unable to rise to general conceptions or higher ideals. Yet this law which gives us power over our acts is also the law which enslaves us. We are born to be habitual creatures, and once a certain way of doing things has been established, it becomes our master. The drunkard whose daily indulgence has etched deep furrows in his nervous system finds himself chained by his own past conduct. The miser who has acquired the custom of hoarding cannot break free, even when fortune would allow generosity. The coward who has yielded to fear will continue to shrink, for his nerves have learned the posture of timidity. Thus habit, while our ally, may also be our tyrant. While it enables us to act with efficiency, it binds us in iron bands if we surrender unthinkingly. It is a remarkable truth that the whole fabric of our moral life rests upon habit. Virtue is nothing but the habitual performance of acts consonant with the moral law. Courage is not a single deed of daring, but the ingrained readiness to confront danger. Honesty is the daily refusal to defraud in little things, until the refusal becomes instinctive. Religion itself is maintained by habit, for prayer, worship, and obedience repeated become woven into the very tissue of our being. The child trained to reverence, the youth disciplined to self-control, the man habituated to duty. These are the products of a nervous system molded by use and repetition. Without such discipline, there would be no character, no constancy, no fidelity to ideals. To understand the significance of habit in human psychology, one must look beyond the individual and consider the race. Society itself is but a great collection of habits, the regularities of custom, law, and institution. Language is a mass of habits fixed in the memory of millions, binding them together by common signs. Government rests upon the habitual obedience of the people to authority. Commerce depends upon the habitual keeping of contracts. Even science is but organized habit in thought, the persistent adherence to methods of observation and reasoning that have once proved fruitful. Civilization would dissolve into chaos if these accumulated habits were suddenly withdrawn. We would be as barbarians, incapable of cooperation, each following the impulse of the hour. The stability of nations, the continuity of culture, the very possibility of progress, rest upon the conservative influence of habit. It is sometimes imagined that genius, originality, and inspiration are opposed to habit. Nothing could be further from the truth. The genius himself must lean upon habits, else his powers would scatter in incoherence. The poet must have the habit of meter, the painter the habit of line and color, the musician the habit of harmony and fingering. Inspiration alone is fleeting. It is by discipline and repetition that it becomes productive. The great discoveries of science, the masterpieces of art, the victories of statesmanship, all presuppose the habits of patience, accuracy, and perseverance. Habit provides the frame within which genius works. Without it, the flame of originality flickers out. There is another aspect of habit which touches closely upon the freedom of the will. If habit were absolute, man would be but an automaton, repeating blindly the actions once learned. But we know that habit is plastic in its inception, that at the moment of formation the will may intervene and determine what paths shall be fixed. The youth stands at the crossroads of his career, and each act of choice is a stroke of the chisel upon his character. Once the mark is made, it hardens into permanence, but in the beginning there is liberty. Thus the dignity of moral education lies in this, that it can shape the future by directing habits while they are still forming. Teach a child to be punctual, to be truthful, to be industrious, and you are carving lines which will guide him through life. Neglect him, and other lines, perhaps of sloth, deceit, or vice, will as inevitably enslave him. Consider the relation of habit to the deeper elements of human nature. Instinct is the inherited habit of the race, laid down by countless generations. Custom is the social habit of communities. Education is the deliberate formation of habit in the young. Everywhere we find the same principal actions repeated become easier. Tendencies once begun perpetuate themselves, the groove deepens with every passage. The individual is plastic in childhood, but with age the habits become set, until at last character is fixed as granite. The tragic truth is that we become the slaves of our youth. The habits we allow in our tender years grow into destiny. Hence the urgency of wise training, the solemn responsibility of parents, teachers, and leaders of youth. Let us look at an example. A boy taught from early life to rise promptly at the appointed hour, to obey at once, to restrain his temper, to finish what he begins, will in manhood possess punctuality, obedience, self-control, perseverance. These are not abstract virtues, but the very momentum of his nervous system. On the other hand, a boy indulged in idleness, permitted to lie, encouraged to yield to caprice, will in manhood carry those same habits, and no appeal to reason or conscience will easily undo them. His brain has acquired the paths of negligence, deceit, and weakness. The seeds once planted bear their fruit with a certainty which is almost biological. We reap as we have sown. This principle explains the conservatism of mankind. Once a custom has been established, once a form of worship, a style of government, a mode of dress, or a social ritual has become habitual, it clings with tenacity. Men follow the beaten track not from deliberate choice, but because the nervous system resists innovation. The peasant repeats the traditions of his ancestors because it is easier than inventing new ones. The statesman clings to old institutions because the people will not endure sudden change. Thus habit is the great conservative power, resisting revolution, clinging to what has once been. Yet it is precisely this which gives stability to society, which makes continuity possible. Too rapid change would shatter the social organism. Habit provides the cohesion which preserves it. And yet, while habit is conservative, it is not absolute. Innovation creeps in through the plasticity of youth, through the genius who forms new habits of thought, through the accidents of history which compel men to adapt. The interplay of habit and novelty, of conservatism and progress, is the drama of human history. Habit preserves, novelty creates, habit secures, novelty liberates. Both are necessary, and the art of education, of statesmanship, of personal growth, is to balance them wisely. Too much habit, and life stagnates, too much novelty, and life dissolves into chaos. The psychologist who studies man must therefore give habit a place of the highest importance. It is not a trivial fact, but a fundamental law. The mind itself, with its trains of association, is but a theater of habits, one idea calling up another by accustomed linkage. Memory is the habit of retaining images, reasoning the habit of comparing them, language the habit of expressing them in sounds. Our loves, our hates, our aspirations are but habits of the emotional nature. Even conscience itself is a habit of preferring the better, strengthened by exercise, weakened by neglect. When we say a man has a strong will, we mean that he has acquired the habit of controlling his impulses, of persisting in chosen courses. When we say a man is weak, we mean that he has acquired the habit of yielding, of drifting. All the distinctions of character, all the varieties of personality, may be traced to differences in habit. Let us not suppose that habit is a mere curiosity of psychology. It is the very key to practical wisdom. To know that acts repeated grow easier, that paths once trodden tend to be trodden again, that the brain and nerves are pliant in youth, but rigid in age. This is to hold in our hands the secret of destiny. For if this be true, then we must seize the earliest hours of life to engrave noble habits, to shun ignoble ones. We must guard each act of choice as though eternity hung upon it, for indeed eternity does hang upon it in the shape of character. One false indulgence may start a groove which years of repentance cannot efface. One brave effort may initiate a habit of courage which will uphold us in 1,000 dangers. Habit is the fate of character, and character is the fate of life. In the end, the significance of habit lies in this. It is the point of contact between nature and freedom, between the plasticity of the organism and the ideals of the will. It is the mechanism through which spirit expresses itself in matter, through which purpose becomes flesh. It is the secret by which man, though born a creature of impulse, may become a creature of principle. It is the law which makes education possible, which makes morality real, which makes civilization stable. To understand it is to understand the very fabric of human life. When we turn from the general consideration of habit to its physiological basis, we find ourselves confronted with one of the most remarkable properties of living tissue. The nervous system, unlike dead matter, is endowed with plasticity. By plasticity, we mean the possession of a structure weak enough to yield to an influence, yet strong enough not to yield all at once. A substance so soft that it cannot retain any form, or so rigid that no form can be impressed upon it, is alike unfitted for the work of habit. The brain and nerves occupy the intermediate position. They can be modified, but once modified, they retain the change. They are pathways upon which currents once made will be apt to run again, not by chance, but by a law as constant as any known to nature. The simplest way to picture this fact is to recall how a path is formed in the earth. The first traveler who crosses a meadow finds resistance at every step, grass and soil opposing his progress. The second finds the traces of the first and steps where he stepped, finding his way a trifle easier. The third and the fourth repeat the process, until at last a beaten track is established which all subsequent passers follow of necessity. The earth, worn and pressed, has acquired a groove. So, with water trickling over a hillside, the first drop makes no perceptible impression, but each following drop deepens the channel until a rivulet is formed, and finally a stream whose bed no ordinary force can change. It is in this sense that the nervous tissue is plastic. The currents which traverse it leave behind them modifications which make it easier for the same currents to traverse it again. A habit is thus the physiological imprint of a past action upon the nervous system. The child who first essays to stand totters and falls, his muscles uncertain, his nerves untrained. Each fresh effort, however, leaves behind a trace, and the fibers which once conducted in a certain manner are more ready to conduct so again. At last the act of standing becomes assured, then that of walking, then of running. Each complex performance resting upon the fact that the nervous paths have been beaten into smoother and smoother channels. The same truth holds of speech, of writing, of playing an instrument. The fumbling of the novice is only the mark of nervous tissue resisting new demands. The dexterity of the master is the sign of tissue transformed into habitual pathways by countless repetitions. The physiologists have long recognized that the laws of habit are but special cases of the general laws of nervous action. When a current passes through a nerve cell, it produces molecular changes which make the recurrence of that current easier. The exact nature of these changes eludes observation, but we may suppose them to be physical alterations in the protoplasm. Slight adjustments in the connections between cell and cell, a lessening of resistance at points of contact. The brain, though solid in aspect, is a living workshop in which every impression, every volition, leaves its record. Just as wax receives the seal and retains its stamp, so the brain receives the stroke of experience and holds its form. The permanence of habit is nothing other than the permanence of these organic modifications. It is instructive to compare the nervous system with mechanical and chemical analogies. Iron once bent is more easily bent in the same place again. A bar of lead once bowed retains the curve, though feebly. A piece of paper folded and smoothed retains a line which determines its next folding. Water running over soil engraves a channel that guides subsequent streams. Powder rubbed in a mortar mixes more readily after the first grinding. In every case we see the same principle, that once an action has been performed, the conditions of its recurrence are favored. But while in inert matter the effect is often trivial, in living tissue the effect is profound. The nerve cell not only yields but grows by yielding. It adjusts its very structure to facilitate the repeated act, until the performance becomes automatic. Consider the case of memory. The first time a verse is learned, the brain is compelled to labor painfully, forging new connections between ideas. With each repetition the connections are strengthened, until at last the verse comes unbidden, the words flowing one after the other as though they were inevitable. What has happened is that the brain has acquired a definite set of associations, a path of discharge along which the nervous currents travel with ease. Forgetting occurs when these paths are not maintained, when disuse allows them to be overgrown, so to speak, by other processes. Thus the physiology of habit and the physiology of memory are but two aspects of the same fact, the plasticity of nervous tissue. Nowhere is this more evident than in the motor habits of the body. A man learning to skate must attend to every motion, his muscles are awkward, his balance precarious. But as days pass, the nervous system organizes itself. The innumerable small contractions and relaxations fall into order. Soon the man glides over the ice without conscious effort, able to think of other matters while his body performs its task. The brain has constructed a mechanism which runs of itself once started, and it is not only in gross movements that this occurs. The delicate touch of the pianist, the swift calculations of the chess player, the instinctive parry of the swordsman, all are instances where the nervous system, drilled by repetition, acts automatically, sparing the conscious mind from toil. The fact that the nervous system grows to the modes in which it has been exercised gives us the biological foundation of habit. The cells and fibers are not inert wires, but living organs whose structure is changed by function. The microscope reveals that the brain is composed of countless cells, each with branching processes reaching to its neighbors. The currents of nerve force leap from branch to branch, from cell to cell, like sparks across a network. At each point of contact, a certain resistance must be overcome, but once overcome repeatedly, the resistance lessens. The bridge is laid, the traffic moves smoothly. It is here, at these innumerable junctions, that habit resides. It is the facilitation of discharge along certain lines, the knitting together of paths which were once separate, the construction of highways of nervous conduction. The consequence of this arrangement is of the highest practical importance. Since the nervous system is altered by every act, no act is indifferent. Every thought we think, every deed we do, leaves its trace. If repeated, the trace deepens into a groove, and our very brain becomes an organ of that habit. It is in this sense that character is physiological. The miser's avarice, the drunkard's craving, the scholar's diligence, are all registered in the tissue of the nervous system. The very fibers of the brain have learned to conduct in a certain way, and though the will may struggle, it struggles against the inertia of organized matter. To undo such habits is like turning back the course of a river or effacing the furrow of a plow. It can be done, but only by effort proportionate to the depth of the groove. This physiological truth explains why early education is so momentous. The brain of the child is exceedingly plastic, its pathways are easily laid, its currents easily turned. What is taught and repeated in youth becomes embodied in the very structure of the nervous system. The child trained to obedience, to self-control, to attention, carries into manhood a nervous system which performs these acts with little strain. The child neglected, who forms habits of inattention, of disorder, of vice, grows into a man whose nervous system is unfitted for virtue. For this reason we insist upon early discipline, not as a moral abstraction, but as a physiological necessity. The brain itself becomes the organ of character, molded by the habits formed in childhood. Another fact of significance is the economy which habit brings. The nervous system, once organized for an action, requires less energy to repeat it. The beginner wastes effort, sending currents along wrong paths, contracting unnecessary muscles, engaging the whole organism in confusion. The adept, trained by habit, employs only the necessary channels, his movements are direct, his effort minimized. Hence the ease with which the skilled artisan, the trained athlete, the practiced musician perform their tasks. Habit is economy of nerve, force, the reduction of labor, the liberation of higher faculties for nobler uses. Without habit, our lives would be consumed in attending to trivial details. With habit, we rise above them to the realm of thought and ideal. It should not be forgotten that habit, while a law of nervous tissue, is not limited to motor acts. Sensation and emotion also follow its sway. The ear trained to music hears distinctions which the untrained ear misses. The palate accustomed to delicacies grows fastidious, while the rough laborer relishes coarse fare. The emotional nature, too, falls into grooves. The man who indulges anger finds himself more prone to anger. The man who cultivates benevolence finds it easier to be kind. In each case, the nervous system is adapting itself to repeated currents, lowering resistance, fixing tendencies. Thus, the physiology of habit underlies not only action, but feeling and thought. The most solemn aspect of this truth is that once habits are established in the nervous system, they become, in a sense, mechanical. They run off of themselves, independent of our higher volition. The drunkard may repent, but his nerves crave the accustomed stimulant. The libertine may vow reform, but his body yearns for indulgence. The coward may resolve to be brave, but his muscles shrink from danger. The brain has been organized for vice, and the will contends against its own flesh. Yet even here the plasticity of the system offers hope. New habits can be formed, new channels dug, if only the effort be persistent. The old grooves will not vanish, but new grooves may divert the current. In this lies the possibility of regeneration, of moral reform, of salvation. When we survey the physiology of habit in its entirety, we see that it is the bridge between the mechanical and the spiritual. On the one side, habit is law, inexorable as gravitation, recording every act in the tissue of the brain. On the other side, it is the instrument of freedom, offering itself to be shaped by choice, capable of being turned to good or evil. We cannot escape it, we can only direct it. Every day we are forming habits, consciously or unconsciously, engraving lines upon the living substance of our nervous system. The physiologist shows us the mechanism, the psychologist interprets its meaning, the moralist proclaims its duty. But all agree upon the central fact that habit is the fundamental law of our nervous life. Thus, the physiology of habit is not a barren curiosity of science, but the most practical of truths. It teaches us that our very flesh is the servant of repetition, that every act writes itself into our organism, that our destiny is in our hands while we are still plastic, but that once hardened, we become the slaves of what we have chosen. To know this is to feel the solemnity of life, the weight of responsibility, the urgency of early discipline, the necessity of vigilance. It is to see that man is at once a creature of law and a being of freedom, that in the nervous system lies both his bondage and his deliverance. Habit is thus the physiological basis of character, the biological foundation of conduct, the very secret of our humanity. When we extend the notion of habit beyond the individual and the nervous system, we find ourselves compelled to consider its universal presence in nature. For habit is not peculiar to man, nor even to living tissue alone. It is a law that extends to matter itself, a principle as constant as gravitation, shaping the processes of the universe. Indeed, the distinction between the animate and the inanimate is less sharp when we see that both alike are governed by the tendency of events once occurring to recur, of pathways once open to be traversed again. Habit is but the name we give to this persistence when we speak of life, and law is the name we give it when we speak of things. Consider first the simplest cases. A body once set in motion tends to continue in motion in the same direction, with the same velocity, unless checked. This is Newton's first law of mechanics, and it is habit in its most elemental form. The stone rolled upon the hillside gathers a groove in the earth, and down that groove other stones are apt to follow. The planet swings in its orbit, repeating its curve around the sun, as it has done for millions of years, each revolution a habit of celestial matter. The tides ebb and flow with rhythmic certainty, the seasons return in their appointed order, the stars rise and set. All these are instances where the great mechanism of the cosmos, once engaged in a certain movement, maintains it, conserving energy, economizing effort, repeating its act because to deviate would demand a fresh disturbance. The chemist teaches us the same truth under another form. Elements combine with regularity, their affinities constant, their reactions predictable. Oxygen unites with hydrogen to form water, and it does so invariably, as if by habit. The crystal once formed retains its angles, its facets repeating themselves with exactness. A spark applied to powder detonates it every time, never otherwise. In these cases we see that matter itself has grooves, lines of least resistance, and that once a process has been initiated it follows the accustomed line with an inevitableness, which is but the analog of habit in organisms. The repetition is so exact that we call it law, But in essence, it is the same tendency to recurrence which governs our own nervous acts. What the physicist calls inertia, what the chemist calls affinity, what the astronomer calls gravitation, what the biologist calls heredity, are but so many names for this deeper fact, that nature abhors novelty, that processes once begun are perpetuated, that the universe conserves its modes. Habit, in this large sense, is the very texture of reality, the rolling of planets, the crystallization of salts, the conduction of electricity, the propagation of light. All are instances of nature repeating itself, economizing energy, avoiding fresh expenditure by following old tracks. The analogy with human habit grows clearer when we consider the principle of energy conservation. The nervous system, as we have seen, forms habits because repetition lessens resistance and saves effort. A movement once learned costs less to perform. The nervous currents, having once run again more easily. The same principle reigns in physical nature. The energy of the world is constant, it cannot be created or destroyed, only transformed. But transformations themselves follow the paths of least resistance. Heat flows from hot to cold, electricity discharges from higher to lower potential, water runs downhill. In each case, the current chooses the way already made easy, the line which demands the least work. This is the universal law of economy, and habit is its expression in living tissue. We must not be misled by the superficial difference between the rigidity of natural law and the flexibility of organic habit. Both alike are but degrees of the same fact. In the inanimate world, the grooves are deep, the repetitions exact, so that variation seems excluded. In the animate world, the grooves are shallower, the tissue more plastic, so that variation is possible. Yet in both alike, repetition breeds facility, and once a course is set, it tends to persist. The difference is only that in man and beast the course can be changed, especially in youth, while in matter the course is fixed from the beginning. Thus habit is but law in the making, and law is but habit hardened by eternity. It is striking to observe how the natural world is full of rhythmic processes which, though explained in terms of physics, bear the same marks as human habits. The beating of the heart, the alternation of day and night, the swing of the pendulum, the vibration of sound, the undulation of light, all are repetitions, each stroke making the next easier, each oscillation conserving the energy of the former. Even in geology, we perceive the same law. Rivers carve valleys deeper with each flow, glaciers grind their beds smoother with each advance, winds polish the rocks with ceaseless strokes, the sea waves etch the cliffs into accustomed forms. Nature's face is furrowed by her habits, as surely as the visage of man is lined by his repeated emotions. The student of psychology is compelled to recognize that this profound analogy is no accident. For if the nervous system is matter, and if matter everywhere obeys the same law, then the physiology of habit in the brain is but one instance of the universal tendency of things to repeat themselves. The path in the meadow beaten by many feet, the groove in the rock worn by many rains, the orbit of the planet, the channel in the nerve fibers, all are one principle under different guises. It is a principle which may be summed up as this, that the world tends to conserve its modes of action, to maintain its structure by repeating its movements, to economize energy by flowing in the same channels. The moral import of this truth is vast. For if man's habits are not alien from nature's laws, but continuous with them, then our conduct is as much a part of the order of the world as the march of the stars. We are not exempt from law, we are law embodied. The drunkard who cannot break his chains is no more a miracle than the planet which cannot leave its orbit. Both are obeying the same principle, the inertia of matter once set in motion. And just as the astronomer can calculate the return of the comet, so may the moralist predict the fate of the man who indulges vice. The certainty is not less, only the complexity greater. Man is a creature of habit because nature is a universe of habit, and our freedom lies not in escaping it, but in directing it aright. This view relieves us of the illusion that habit is something accidental or secondary. It is rather the very basis of stability. Were there no such law, the world would be chaos, every act isolated, every event unique. Science would be impossible, memory useless, foresight vain. The very existence of knowledge depends upon the fact that the future will resemble the past, that events will repeat, that habits endure. When the sun rises each morning, it is because nature has the habit of turning the earth upon its axis. When fire burns, it is because carbon and oxygen have the habit of combining. When water flows, it is because gravity has the habit of attracting. These are not metaphors but identities. The regularity of nature is the sum of her habits. One might object that this reduces all to mechanism, that freedom and novelty vanish. But we must distinguish between the rigidity of fixed grooves and the plasticity of new ones. Habit is not only conservation, it is also creation. For every new act is a disturbance which may establish a new channel, a new rhythm, a new law. The first time an action occurs, whether in physics or in life, it is an innovation. If repeated, it becomes a habit. If eternalized, it becomes a law. Thus the universe is not a mere machine but a growing organism, whose habits accumulate, but whose plasticity remains. In man this plasticity is most manifest, but even in matter it is not absent. The nebula condenses into a star, the star cools into a planet, the planet evolves new forms. Each stage is new, yet once established, it repeats itself, obeying the same principle. The efficiency of habitual action, both in nature and in man, is its crowning mark. The nervous system economizes effort by automatism, nature economizes energy by inertia. Neither wastes force, both conserve it. This is the principle of least action which physicists recognize, that nature always chooses the shortest path, the simplest curve, the most economical expenditure. The soap bubble forms a sphere because that surface encloses the greatest volume with the least area. The ray of light bends when passing from air into water because the bent path takes the least time. The planets move in ellipses, not in random curves, because the ellipse is the form determined by economy of energy. In each case the action is habitual. The path is of least resistance, the law is conservation. It is therefore no exaggeration to say that habit is the root of order. Without it, neither physics nor psychology would exist. The world would be a perpetual novelty, a chaos of unrelated events. With it, the world is a cosmos, a system of regularities, an organism of laws. The scientist may then generalize without fear, the moralist may exhort with confidence, the individual may plan with assurance. For though change is possible, continuity is certain. Habit guarantees stability, while freedom introduces novelty. Life is poised between the two, and wisdom consists in understanding their relation. The analogy between human habits and natural processes is thus not poetic but literal. When we say that the river has the habit of flowing to the sea, we mean that its waters, once having found a channel, continue therein by law of least resistance. When we say that the crystal has the habit of forming in hexagons, we mean that the molecules, once disposed in a certain order, continue so disposed. When we say that the nerve has the habit of discharging in a certain way, we mean that its cells, once modified by use, retain the modification. In each case, the essence is repetition made easy, energy conserved, effort economized. The whole universe is but a vast system of such habits. The lesson we draw from this is that our own habits are not to be despised as trivial accidents, but revered as manifestations of the same order which holds the stars in their courses. Every act of ours which is repeated is weaving itself into the texture of universal law. Our virtues are not fragile sentiments but grooves in the nervous system, allies of cosmic order. Our vices are not mere misfortunes but grooves likewise, binding us to the same law. To train habit is to cooperate with nature. To neglect it is to surrender to chaos within ourselves. The philosophy of habit is thus the philosophy of law, the recognition that our personal destiny is continuous with the destiny of the world. The great value of this perspective lies in its sobering effect. When we perceive that every indulgence, every lapse, every indulgent act is recording itself not only in our nerves but in the very framework of law, we feel the solemnity of conduct. It is not merely ourselves we are shaping, but the order to which we belong. The conservation of energy, the economy of action, the tendency of processes to recur, all speak to us with the voice of morality. They remind us that our only freedom lies in the beginning of the act. Before habit is formed, once formed, the act is law. We may mold the clay while it is soft, but once hardened it is a stone. We may guide the rivulet when it is young, but once it is a river it must flow to the sea. This is why youth is the season of destiny. For then the nervous system, like fresh soil, receives every impression, every act, every thought, and engraves it. Later the grooves are too deep, the channels too fixed. The habits of age are the laws of youth grown rigid. This is the biological truth, but it is also the cosmic truth, that law is but habit hardened, and habit is but law in the making. To understand this is to grasp the very unity of nature, the deep continuity between our own conduct and the eternal order. In the end, habit and law are two words for one reality. They express the persistence of form in the midst of change, the conservation of energy in the midst of expenditure, the rhythm of repetition in the midst of novelty. The world is a vast organism of habits, and we ourselves are its members. Our brains, our characters, our societies are but instances of the same law that governs the stars and the stones. To neglect habit is to neglect law. To understand habit is to understand nature. And thus the study of habit is no mere chapter in psychology, but the key to the very constitution of the universe. When we extend our observation from man to the animal kingdom, we find habit as universal and decisive as within ourselves. The lower forms of life exhibit the same laws of repetition, the same plasticity of nervous tissue, the same tendency of acts once performed to be performed again with increasing ease. Yet in animals there appears another factor, that of instinct, which must be carefully distinguished from habit. For while habit is acquired through repetition and experience, instinct is inborn, the inheritance of the nervous system, a predisposition of the organism to act in certain definite ways without prior learning. The chick that pecks at grain the moment it is hatched, the spider that weaves its web without ever having been taught, the bee that constructs its cell with mathematical precision. These are not the results of personal experience, but the transmitted acquisitions of the race, habits stereotyped in heredity. The relation between instinct and habit is intimate. Instinct may be regarded as nature's habit, the fixed ways of acting imposed upon the animal by ancestral repetition. Habit, on the other hand, is the individual's instinct, the personal grooves worn in his nervous system by his own experience. The distinction, though clear in theory, is often blurred in practice, for many acts combine elements of both. A bird is instinctively impelled to fly, but it must learn the exact adjustments of wing and balance by repeated efforts. A kitten instinctively pounces upon moving objects, but it acquires accuracy and swiftness only by play and practice. Thus instinct furnishes the framework, habit fills it in. The one is inherited plasticity, the other acquired, the one belongs to the race, the other to the individual. The lessons of comparative behavior show us how indispensable this union is. Where instinct is strong and definite, as in insects, habit is less necessary. The ant, the bee, the butterfly live almost entirely by the blind impulses with which they are born. Each generation repeats the same acts with little variation, as though bound by fate. The beaver builds its dam, the bird weaves its nest, The salmon ascends the river to spawn, each with a certainty that seems mechanical. Yet even here, close observation reveals elements of habit. The beaver modifies its construction according to circumstances, the bird adapts its nest to the materials at hand, the salmon changes its route when streams are blocked. Instinct, though dominant, does not exclude a certain flexibility, and habit creeps in to adjust the act to novel conditions. In the higher animals, instinct loses something of its precision and habit takes a larger role. The dog, the horse, the elephant, though endowed with native impulses, show remarkable power of learning. They acquire tricks, respond to training, form associations, repeat actions with increasing readiness. The circus horse, which prances at a signal, the hunting dog, which points or retrieves, the elephant, which obeys the mahout's command, are living witnesses of the plasticity of their nervous systems. Their instincts are the foundation, but their habits are the superstructure. They are capable of education because their acts can be modified by repetition, their nervous currents diverted into new channels. The difference between instinct and habit may be illustrated by their dependence upon time. Instinct is perfect at birth. Habit requires experience. The chick runs as soon as its legs are free, guided by instincts inherited through countless ancestors. The human infant, born with few definite instincts, must acquire even the simplest acts by long training. In this lies the explanation of man's superiority. His instincts are fewer and less precise, but his capacity for habit is greater. The very incompleteness of his nature makes him educable, gives him freedom, permits civilization. Animals, tied to instinct, remain fixed in their modes of life. Man, plastic through habit, advances from age to age, acquiring new arts, new morals, new institutions. The beaver builds as its ancestors built 1,000 years ago. Man builds railroads and telegraphs, changes his environment, invents new worlds. Habit, more than instinct, is the secret of his progress. It is important, however, not to depreciate instinct. Without it, the animal could not survive long enough to form habits. The newborn lamb must instinctively seek the udder, or it will perish before experience can teach it. The chick must instinctively peck, the fish must instinctively swim, the bird must instinctively cry for food. These are the fundamental securities of life, prepared beforehand by heredity. Habit comes afterward, refining, enlarging, adjusting. Instinct is nature's provision for the beginning, habit is her method for the continuation. Together they secure the balance between permanence and adaptability. When we watch animals in their native state, we are impressed with the persistence of instinct and the gradual intrusion of habit. The bird migrates at the appointed season, guided by an impulse as ancient as the race. Yet in its journey it learns the landmarks, and each year its course is more certain, its resting place is fixed by custom. The fox is instinctively cunning, but it grows more so by experience, learning the tricks of hunters, forming the habit of doubling and hiding. The horse fears strange objects instinctively, but repeated exposure lessens the fear until habit conquers instinct. In every case, the two factors interplay. Instinct furnishing the original bias, habit modifying it in the light of experience. The comparative study of animals yields lessons for psychology. We see that habit is not peculiar to man, but a general property of nervous systems. We see also that the balance of instinct and habit varies with the grade of the creature. The lower the animal, the more it lives by fixed instincts. The higher the animal, the more it lives by acquired habits. Insects are the slaves of instinct, mammals the creatures of habit, man the master of both. The evolution of intelligence is marked by the displacement of instinct by habit, the substitution of plasticity for rigidity. The more educable a being, the fewer and weaker are its instincts, the greater its capacity for forming habits. This truth throws light upon the meaning of education. To educate is simply to form useful habits, to substitute organized modes of action for blind impulses. The child is born with few instincts, but endless possibilities of habit. Every lesson he learns, every skill he acquires, every virtue he practices, is but a habit wrought into his nervous system. The animal trainer does the same with his horse or dog. By repetition, association, reward, and punishment, he engraves new paths in the animal's brain. What the trainer does by art, nature does by circumstance, engraving habits upon all creatures as they live. Thus habit is the great educator of the world, the universal discipline by which life adjusts itself to environment. The distinction between instinct and habit is therefore not one of kind but of degree. Both are alike in being tendencies to act in fixed ways, both are rooted in the nervous system, both conserve energy by repetition. Instinct is the habit of the race, transmitted through heredity. Habit is the instinct of the individual, acquired through experience. Instinct is inflexible, uniform, and immediate. Habit is flexible, variable, and progressive. Instinct is nature's starting point, habit her method of growth. Together they explain the conduct of animals, and in their interplay we see the whole story of behavior. The moral drawn from this survey is that man, in whom habit predominates, must assume responsibility for his conduct. The bee cannot change its cell. The beaver cannot alter its dam. The bird cannot cease to migrate. But man can form new habits, can reshape his life, can rise above his instincts. He is not condemned to be a creature of fixed impulses. He is endowed with the plasticity of nervous tissue which permits him to be something more. The difference between the savage and the civilized, between the ignorant and the learned, between the vicious and the virtuous, is simply the difference in habits. All rest upon the same law which governs the animal kingdom, but in man it becomes a law of freedom, because he can choose the habits he will form. The study of animal behavior thus brings us back to ourselves. We are but one species among many, subject to the same laws of repetition, the same dependence on nervous grooves. Yet our plasticity is greater, our instincts fewer, our habits more numerous. In this lies both our peril and our promise. For if we form evil habits, they bind us with chains stronger than instinct. If we form noble habits, they lift us to heights unknown in the animal kingdom. The beast is fixed by nature, the man is fixed by himself. Habit is his destiny, as instinct is the destiny of the brute. When we contemplate the marvelous instincts of animals, we are tempted to wonder whether they are not wiser than we. The bee's cell is more exact than the builder's wall, the spider's web more delicate than any loom can weave, the bird's nest more suited to its purpose than human contrivance. Yet we must remember that these acts, though perfect, are unchangeable. They are wonderful because they are stereotyped, because they repeat without variation the inherited pattern. Man's acts may be clumsy by comparison, but they are plastic, improvable, progressive. He can correct his errors, invent new methods, adapt to new conditions. His strength lies not in instinct but in habit, and habit is teachable. Thus, the very weakness of man at birth, his lack of definite instincts, is the condition of his later supremacy. He is the most helpless of creatures when born, but the most powerful when grown, because he has acquired habits that no animal can rival. The continuity of habit across the animal kingdom shows the unity of life. From the insect following its blind impulses to the man directing his chosen habits, the same law prevails. Actions repeated become easier. Tendencies once begun perpetuate themselves. Nervous systems grow to the modes in which they are exercised. This is the great law which binds all creatures together. It is the explanation of instinct, the secret of habit, the key to conduct. It makes the world intelligible, for it reveals the order in what seems confusion. It makes progress possible, for it shows how new acts can be built upon old ones, new habits upon instincts. And it makes morality solemn, for it shows how our present deeds are laying the grooves of our future destiny. Thus, the study of animals is not a curiosity but a mirror. In them we see ourselves, our own nature written large. Their instincts reveal our instincts. Their habits reveal our habits. Their limitations warn us of our dangers. Their capacities suggest our possibilities. We are not separate from them, but continuous with them, sharers of the same nervous law. Yet in us the law rises to consciousness, and we may use it deliberately. The brute obeys instinct blindly. The man fashions habits by choice. In this lies our dignity, our peril, and our hope. When we turn to the conduct of daily life, habit reveals itself as its master influence. The very texture of existence, the sequence of our hours, the rhythm of our actions, are all determined by habits formed and hardened until they seem part of ourselves. From the moment we rise in the morning until we lie down at night, we are the creatures of routine. The way we dress, the food we eat, the words we use, the gestures of courtesy we extend, all are matters of habit. We imagine ourselves deliberate and free, but 9/10 of our acts are mechanical repetitions, discharges along nervous pathways once laid down and now running of themselves. Without habit, each day would be a chaos of indecision. With habit, it flows with the steadiness of a river in its bed. This automatic character of life is both a blessing and a danger. It is a blessing because it relieves the higher faculties from incessant care. We can think of noble things while our hands button our coats. We can meditate on truth while our feet carry us along familiar streets. We can plan for the future while our lips utter conventional phrases. Habit performs these tasks without taxing consciousness, leaving it free for loftier employments. Were it otherwise, our minds would be drowned in trivialities, our will paralyzed by perpetual choice. But it is also a danger, for if bad habits have been acquired, they too run of themselves, carrying us downward as irresistibly as good habits carry us upward. The man who has formed the habit of lying will lie without thought. The man who has learned to yield to temptation will yield before he is aware. The nervous system does not distinguish between noble and ignoble grooves. It only repeats what has been engraved. Conduct, therefore, depends not upon momentary will but upon the accumulated habits of life. When we speak of willpower, we must recognize its limited sphere. The will can initiate, can struggle, can choose at the outset. But once habits are fixed, the will has no longer free play. It must contend against the inertia of nervous tissue, against channels worn deep by repetition. To resist an old habit is to fight against one's own body. Hence the misery of the drunkard who resolves to reform, yet finds his very nerves craving the stimulant. The weakness of the sluggard who vows to rise early yet lies, enslaved by the weight of his indolent habit. The despair of the liar who means to speak truth yet finds the falsehood springing unbidden from his lips. The will may flare up, but the grooves of habit remain, and the current slides down them despite resistance. The lesson is plain: willpower is most potent at the beginning of habit, when the grooves are not yet formed, when the nervous system is still plastic. Once hardened, only a superhuman effort can divert it. This is why the education of the young is so momentous. The child is a bundle of plastic tendencies. Every act, every lesson, every example engraves a path in his brain. What he does today he will find easier to do tomorrow. What he omits he will find harder to do in the future. The will of the parent or teacher, exerted wisely in these tender years, can shape destiny by guiding habit. The will of the child, once trained, will run along those grooves with little effort, repeating obedience, industry, self-control. Neglect him, and bad habits form of themselves, growing like weeds in the soil. Then in later years, no appeal to reason or conscience will avail, for his very nervous system will be his enemy. We must strike while the iron is hot, while habit is still in the making, else we forge chains which neither prayers nor tears can break. Habit shapes character because it creates the constancy of conduct. A single act does not determine what a man is, but repeated acts form tendencies, and tendencies harden into traits. The honest man is not he who tells the truth once, but he who tells it habitually, until falsehood becomes impossible. The brave man is not he who dares once, but he who has dared often, until courage flows from his nerves as naturally as blood from his heart. The virtuous man is not he who resists temptation once, but he who resists always, because his resistance has become habitual. Thus character is nothing but a bundle of habits, woven together into the fabric of the self. We admire character because it is reliable, predictable, steadfast. We know what the man will do because we know what habits he has formed. Without habit, there could be no character, only caprice. It is sometimes said that willpower alone constitutes strength of character. But this is a mistake. Willpower, unless it crystallizes into habit, is fleeting and uncertain. The man who must summon his will for every act of honesty or bravery will soon fail, for will is exhaustible. The true strength of character lies in the fact that right acts have become habitual, requiring little will. The soldier who has drilled until obedience is instinctive will stand firm in battle, though his will tremble. The student who has acquired the habit of study will continue it, though his will flag. The saint who has practiced virtue until it is second nature will resist temptation, though his will be faint. Habit thus economizes will, storing it for emergencies, relieving it of daily burdens. Character is will crystallized into habit, and without habit, will alone is as weak as water. The influence of habit upon our ideals and emotions is equally profound. We love what we are accustomed to love, we hate what we are accustomed to hate. The man habituated to coarse pleasures finds refinement insipid. The man habituated to noble pursuits finds vice repulsive. The emotions themselves follow grooves, and repeated indulgence deepens them. A habit of gratitude makes us sensitive to kindness. A habit of complaint makes us blind to blessings. The miser who has acquired the habit of hoarding feels joy only in gain. The philanthropist who has acquired the habit of giving feels joy only in generosity. Thus habit molds not only our actions but our sentiments, shaping the very springs of conduct. To form noble habits is to create noble feelings, to form base habits is to create base ones. Our loves and hates are but the echoes of our habits. The practical moral of all this is clear: guard the beginnings of habit, for in them lies the germ of character. Every act is important, not in itself, but in its tendency to repeat. A single indulgence may be the first step in a chain of habits leading to ruin. A single effort may be the first step in a chain leading to greatness. We must treat every act as a seed, sure to grow and multiply. We must never say, "It is only this once," for this once may engrave a groove that will haunt us forever. The will is free only in the moment of action. Afterward it is bound by its own record. Our destiny is not shaped by sudden resolutions but by daily habits. We are what we repeatedly do, and excellence is therefore not an act but a habit. Consider the countless habits which make up our daily life. Our manner of speech, our gait, our handwriting, our gestures, our courtesies, our tempers, our amusements. All are acquired, repeated, fixed. Some are trivial, some momentous, but all together constitute our personality. Change them, and we change ourselves. A man may think he is the same, but if his habits alter, he is another being. The conversion of the sinner is nothing but the breaking of old habits and the forming of new ones. The reformation of society is nothing but the same process on a larger scale. Nations, like individuals, are the creatures of habit. Their customs, their laws, their institutions, their morals are all habits grown strong with age. To change them requires revolutions, wars, upheavals. Just as in the individual, it requires agony of will and long discipline. We must not forget that habit operates equally for good and evil. It is a law indifferent to morality. engraving with equal ease the path of virtue or of vice. The same nervous plasticity which enables us to become saints enables us to become sinners. The same grooves which secure honesty may secure dishonesty. The same tendencies which fortify self-control may fortify indulgence. Hence the solemnity of choice. For every indulgence leaves its trace, every sin writes itself into our nerves. The man who yields today makes it harder to resist tomorrow, until at last resistance is impossible. The sinner becomes his sin, as surely as the virtuous man becomes his virtue. It is not punishment from without but necessity from within. The wages of sin is habit, and habit is death. Yet even here hope remains. For habit, though strong, is not absolute. New habits can be formed, new grooves dug, old ones weakened by disuse. The man who has been vicious may by long effort become virtuous, the drunkard may become sober, the coward brave. But the struggle is severe, for it is a struggle against one's own nervous system. The old grooves remain, ready to be traversed, and only constant vigilance can prevent relapse. The lesson is not that reformation is impossible, but that it is difficult, and that prevention is better than cure. Form good habits at the outset, and life will be a joy. Form bad ones, and life will be a burden. The laws of habit are inexorable, but they are also impartial, offering their strength to whoever uses them. Habit is therefore the true basis of morality and religion. Virtue is not a series of isolated acts, but a disposition formed by habit. Faith is not a single belief, but a habit of believing. Worship is not a single prayer, but a habit of devotion. The saint is not born but made, and he is made by habits, sanctified by repetition. If we would be holy, we must habituate ourselves to holiness. If we would be pure, we must habituate ourselves to purity. The law of habit is God's law written in our nerves, commanding us to choose well, to act well, to persist well, that we may become well. To neglect it is to sin against our own bodies, to sin against nature, to sin against the eternal order. When we sum up the matter, we find that human conduct is but the flowering of habit. Daily life is its soil, willpower its gardener, character its fruit. We deceive ourselves when we imagine we live by sudden inspirations or heroic efforts. These are rare. What counts is the long accumulation of small acts, repeated, organized, hardened. The saint is not he who makes one noble effort, but he who has formed 1,000 noble habits. The villain is not he who commits one crime, but he who has habituated himself to crime. Between them lies the whole span of character, and the difference is only in the habits formed. Thus, the philosophy of habit is the philosophy of conduct. It shows us that our destiny is in our daily acts, that our freedom lies in the choice of habits, that our bondage lies in their slavery. It teaches us that character is not an accident but a creation, not a gift but a labor, not a moment but a lifetime. It reminds us that we are, in the last analysis, bundles of habits, each of which we have forged ourselves. If we would know ourselves, we must examine our habits. If we would change ourselves, we must change our habits. There is no other way, for habit is the basis of human conduct. If there is one field where the significance of habit stands out with almost overwhelming force, it is education. To educate is in essence to form habits, to direct the plastic powers of youth into channels of usefulness, to engrave upon the nervous system grooves of conduct that will persist throughout life. The schoolroom is not merely a place of instruction. It is a workshop of habit making. The lessons learned are not chiefly those written in books, but those stamped into the very tissue of the brain, those that will recur of themselves when the books are forgotten. For what is knowledge if not the habit of thinking in certain ways, the tendency to recall certain facts, to make certain connections, to reason in certain patterns? And what is virtue if not the habit of acting in certain directions, the readiness to follow duty without pause, the disposition to restrain impulse and persist in effort? Thus education, in its deepest sense, is the deliberate cultivation of habits. The importance of early training lies in the plasticity of the young nervous system. The child is impressionable, open, unformed, ready to receive whatever comes. His acts are uncertain, his impulses undirected, his tendencies fluid. Every repetition engraves a line, every practice deepens a groove. The earlier the line is drawn, the more permanent it becomes. A habit formed in childhood is as enduring as granite. A habit neglected may never be acquired. Hence the emphasis of every wise teacher upon punctuality, obedience, accuracy, self-control in the young. These virtues, once habitual, will serve through life. These vices, once habitual, will enslave through life. The time to train is not in maturity, when the nervous system has hardened, but in youth, when it is still plastic. Delay is fatal, for the channels of conduct will fill themselves with weeds if not planted with flowers. The role of habit in learning is evident in the simplest acts. The child learning to read stumbles at first over every letter, his mind laboring painfully at each symbol. With repetition, the sight of the letter calls forth its sound automatically, the sight of the word its meaning. At last the act of reading becomes so habitual that he reads without thought of letters at all. The same is true of writing, of arithmetic, of every subject. The pupil is at first conscious of each detail, awkward in every motion, forgetful at every step. Habit takes up the burden, smooths the path, makes the act automatic. Then the mind is free for higher things, for imagination, reasoning, invention. Without habit, education would be impossible, for the mind would be consumed in attending to details, never rising to general truths. With habit, these details care for themselves, leaving the intellect at liberty. The same law applies to discipline. The child must be trained not only in intellectual acts but in moral acts. He must learn to obey, to control temper, to restrain selfishness, to persist in effort. At first these acts are hard, requiring will, enforced by authority. But each repetition engraves a groove, until obedience, self-control, perseverance becomes second nature. Then virtue is easy, for it is habitual. Without discipline, the child grows capricious, impulsive, disobedient. His nervous system learns to run in wrong grooves, and he becomes in later life weak, selfish, vicious. The school, the family, the community all exist to prevent this disaster, to substitute good grooves for bad ones. They are not so much fountains of knowledge as factories of habit. It is striking to observe how small beginnings grow into vast results. The child who is taught to put away his toys in order is forming the habit of neatness that will extend to his books, his tools, his affairs. The child who is trained to tell the truth, even in trifles, is forming the habit of veracity that will support him in crisis. The child who is compelled to finish his tasks is forming the habit of perseverance that will make him reliable in business. The child who is forced to be punctual in school is forming the habit of punctuality that will make him trustworthy in life. Each act seems trivial, but each is a seed of character. Education is nothing but the sowing of such seeds, the cultivation of such habits, the harvest of which is maturity. The economy of habit is nowhere more apparent than in intellectual work. The student who has acquired the habit of attention can fix his mind without fatigue, while the inattentive one is exhausted by the slightest effort. The student who has formed the habit of accuracy will avoid errors unconsciously, while the careless one must labor to correct them. The student who has made order habitual will save hours by method, while the disorderly one wastes time in confusion. Habit, in these respects, is capital stored up, an inheritance that pays interest every day. It is the great secret of scholarship, not genius, not inspiration, but the daily discipline of repeated effort until effort is no longer needed. The true scholar is he whose habits of mind and body are so organized that he cannot but study, cannot but reflect, cannot but persist. If we compare the trained and the untrained mind, The difference is not in talent, but in habit. Both may have equal powers of perception, memory, reasoning, but one has acquired habits of accuracy, perseverance, method, and the other has not. The trained mind approaches problems in regular ways, repeats procedures that experience has proved sound, avoids errors by mechanical correctness. The untrained mind wastes its powers in caprice, begins tasks without finishing, guesses without method, repeats blunders. Thus, the superiority of the educated man lies not in his natural gifts, but in his acquired habits. He is a machine that works smoothly, while the other is one that creaks and halts. Education oils the wheels by habit, and once the wheels run of themselves, genius may be applied to nobler tasks. We see also how habit is the foundation of morality in education. The child who is habituated to kindness becomes kind. The child habituated to honesty becomes honest. The child habituated to self-restraint becomes pure. Preaching, exhortation, reasoning are all feeble compared with the power of habit. The boy who has never been trained to control appetite will not be saved by sermons. The boy who has never been trained to speak truth will not be made honest by arguments. The nervous system must be drilled into right ways before the conscience can support them. Education that neglects habit is vain, for knowledge without conduct is powerless. To teach virtue is not to lecture on duty, but to habituate to duty. The best sermon for a child is the steady enforcement of right habits until they become automatic. It is necessary to recognize that habit, once formed, is hard to change. This fact makes early training imperative, but it also makes reform possible. For though grooves are deep, new grooves may be cut by persistent effort. The boy who has been careless may become careful, if compelled to repeat careful acts. The girl who has been selfish may become generous, if trained to give. The youth who has been idle may become industrious, if forced to labor. But the struggle is great, for the old grooves remain, and relapse is easy. The wiser course is prevention, the training of good habits from the beginning, the avoidance of bad ones altogether. For every bad habit formed is a stone in the edifice of character, and to remove it is to tear down walls already built. Teachers, therefore, bear a responsibility heavier than they often realize. They are not merely instructors of subjects, but molders of character. Every rule of discipline, every requirement of punctuality, every insistence upon neatness, accuracy, obedience, is the laying of a stone in the structure of the child's life. They are writing upon the nervous system lines that will endure when books are forgotten. They are forming habits which will govern not only the school years, but the whole career. A careless teacher, permitting slovenly work, tolerating falsehood, overlooking disobedience, is sowing the seeds of weakness and vice. A conscientious teacher, enforcing order, requiring truth, insisting on effort, is sowing the seeds of strength and virtue. Education is character building, and character building is habit building. Parents, too, share this responsibility. The home is the first school of habit, and the mother is the first teacher. The child's earliest habits of obedience, cleanliness, courtesy, self-control are formed in the nursery. If neglected there, they will not easily be supplied later. The father's example, the mother's discipline, the atmosphere of the home, all engrave grooves upon the child's nervous system. The most elaborate schooling cannot undo the mischief of a neglected home, nor can the most brilliant teaching succeed if parents undo by indulgence what teachers enforce by discipline. Home and school must cooperate, each reinforcing the other, each conscious of the immense power of habit. It is in this connection that we understand the solemn words of ancient wisdom. Train up a child in the way he should go, and when he is old he will not depart from it. This is not a moral maxim only, it is a physiological law. The nervous system, once organized, resists change. The habits of youth become the character of manhood. The grooves made in early years remain when the hand that made them is long forgotten. We cannot escape this law, we can only use it. And to use it wisely is the highest art of education. The secret of success in education, therefore, is repetition. Not once, but many times, must the act be performed until it becomes automatic. Not once, but many times, must the truth be told until lying becomes impossible. Not once, but many times, must self-control be exercised until passion is subdued. Repetition is the chisel that engraves habit upon the nervous system, and habit is the rock upon which character stands. Education that does not repeat is futile, for the impression must be made permanent. Drill, practice, exercise, discipline. These are the tools of the educator, and though they may seem mechanical, they are the essence of life. For life itself is mechanical once habit is formed, and education is the art of making that mechanism noble. We must conclude, then, that the educational importance of habit is supreme. It is the foundation of learning, the secret of discipline, the basis of character. Without it, knowledge is fleeting, virtue unstable, life capricious. With it, knowledge is secure, virtue steadfast, life orderly. To form good habits in youth is to give the best gift that can be given, a gift that will endure when fortune is lost, when friends depart, when health declines. For habits are the soul's machinery, and once set aright, they carry the man steadily on his way. To neglect them is to abandon him to chance, to enslave him to vice, to ruin him before he knows he is ruined. Let every parent, every teacher, every community, therefore, remember that the destiny of the future lies in the habits of the young, and that education is nothing but the deliberate formation of those habits in the direction of truth, virtue, and nobility. When we pass from the individual to the moral sphere, the significance of habit becomes even more profound. For morality itself is little more than the organization of good habits, the habitual preference for right over wrong, the steady performance of duty without need of constant deliberation. Virtue is not a sudden inspiration, nor a single act of heroism, but the repeated doing of just and noble deeds until they become ingrained in the character. The honest man is he who tells the truth, not because he must struggle each time with temptation, but because truth has become the natural language of his soul. The courageous man is he who faces danger not because he summons willpower at the moment, but because his nerves and muscles have been drilled by habit into fearlessness. The charitable man is he who gives without reflection, because generosity has become a second nature. Thus morality is habit raised to its highest power, and virtue is the habit of choosing the good. The importance of this truth lies in its explanation of the constancy of character. If morality depended upon will alone, men would be unreliable, for will is intermittent, faltering, and often exhausted. But when virtue has become habitual, it acts automatically, securing reliability. We know what the virtuous man will do, because he cannot do otherwise. His habits are his destiny. And this constancy is what society demands, for without it there could be no trust, no cooperation, no peace. The merchant must know that his partner will keep faith, not once but always. The citizen must know that his neighbor will respect property, not once but always. The child must know that his parent will protect, not once but always. Such assurances come only from habit. Morality, then, is not an occasional act, but an established groove of conduct, and society itself rests upon the permanence of such grooves. When we examine the moral life of communities, we discover that stable habits are the foundation of their existence. Law is nothing but the habitual obedience of the people to authority. Custom is nothing but the habitual practice of the community in matters of dress, worship, manners, and intercourse. Justice is nothing but the habitual enforcement of rules by courts and officers. If men were to question daily whether they should obey law, respect property, or honor contracts, society would dissolve in anarchy. The fact that they do not question, that they obey automatically, that they conform by habit, is the safeguard of civilization. In this sense, habit is the cement of society, binding its members together in a fabric that endures from generation to generation. The danger, however, is that society, like the individual, may form bad habits. Nations can become habituated to injustice as easily as to justice, to cruelty as easily as to mercy, to falsehood as easily as to truth. The slave-holding community, the caste-ridden community, the corrupt community, are examples of social habits gone wrong. Men may grow so accustomed to oppression that they no longer feel it, so used to dishonesty that they no longer perceive it. Whole nations may move in grooves of vice, just as individuals do. Reformers then must break these grooves and create new ones, a task as difficult for societies as for individuals. But the fact that habit rules both shows how solemn is the responsibility of the present generation in shaping the habits of the next. For every custom tolerated today will be the law of tomorrow, and every vice endured today will be the virtue of tomorrow, if repeated long enough. The moral responsibility of shaping habits, therefore, is enormous. Each man is not only forming his own character, but contributing to the character of society. His acts, repeated, become customs, customs, repeated, become institutions, institutions, repeated, become the life of the people. The child who is taught obedience strengthens the habit of obedience in the community. The citizen who practices honesty strengthens the habit of honesty in commerce. The statesman who insists on justice strengthens the habit of justice in law. Conversely, every act of deceit, every indulgence of cruelty, every lapse of corruption weakens the social habits of virtue and strengthens those of vice. Thus, each individual bears responsibility not only for himself, but for the moral texture of society. The weight of this truth is almost infinite, for it means that our smallest acts reverberate through the social organism, fixing habits that will endure long after we are gone. The relation of habit to moral training is further illustrated by the way conscience operates. Conscience is often pictured as an inner voice, a supernatural guide whispering duty. But in fact, conscience is largely the voice of habits formed through education and social life. We feel remorse when we violate a moral habit. We feel peace when we conform to it. The pangs of conscience are but the friction of habit violated. The ease of virtue is but the smoothness of habit followed. The man who has never been trained in honesty may lie without remorse. The man who has been trained feels anguish if he utters falsehood. The conscience is thus the register of habits, the echo of training, the voice of society speaking through the grooves of our nervous system. This does not lessen its dignity, but explains its authority, for it shows that morality is not a phantom, but a reality engraved upon our very flesh. The moralist who ignores habit preaches in vain. To tell men to be virtuous without helping them to form virtuous habits is like telling them to speak a language without teaching them its grammar. Virtue must be drilled into the nervous system by repetition until it becomes automatic. Sermons, exhortations, inspirations may start the act, but only habit will secure it. The revivalist may stir a sinner to repentance, but unless new habits are formed, the repentance will vanish. The teacher may impress a child with duty, but unless practice engraves it, the impression will fade. The great secret of moral education is not to exhort but to habituate, not to inspire only but to drill, not to produce spasms of goodness but to fix grooves of goodness. Then morality will be safe, for it will be easy. Society's reliance upon habit is also evident in its institutions of punishment and reward. Laws punish the violation of habits society deems sacred. Honors reward the conformity to habits society values. The thief is punished because he has broken the habit of respecting property. The hero is honored because he has conformed to the habit of courage. These sanctions are not arbitrary, but the means by which society reinforces its habits. If punishment were not certain, the habit would weaken. If reward were not bestowed, the habit would lose attraction. Thus, the machinery of justice and honor is nothing but the machinery of habit, maintenance, society's way of engraving its grooves more deeply. It is instructive to note how habit explains the conservatism of societies. Customs, once established, cling with tenacity, not because men reason them out, but because they have become habitual. The Oriental bows, the European shakes hands, the Arab offers hospitality, the Eskimo eats raw flesh, each without question, because habit has made it natural. Institutions persist long after their reasons have vanished, because habit sustains them. Monarchical forms, ancient rituals, obsolete laws continue, not by argument, but by habit. To change them requires revolutions, for habit resists change. Yet this very conservatism is the stability of society, preventing it from dissolving into caprice. Progress, when it comes, is habit changed slowly, gradually, with pain, but with permanence. For new customs must be repeated until they too become habits, and until then they are unstable. The solemnity of moral responsibility is deepened by the fact that habits, once formed, are transmitted socially if not biologically. Children imitate parents, pupils imitate teachers, citizens imitate leaders. Example is the most powerful teacher, for it operates by habit. The father who lies teaches his child to lie. The mother who is kind teaches her child to be kind. Nations copy one another's institutions. Communities copy their neighbors' manners. Thus habits spread like contagion, not by argument but by imitation. We are perpetually forming habits, not only for ourselves but for others, perpetually influencing the grooves of society. This truth makes every act significant, every example solemn, every life a responsibility. In the sphere of religion, habit assumes its highest authority. Worship, prayer, reverence, obedience are all sustained by repetition. The man who prays daily becomes prayerful. The man who neglects prayer loses the power to pray. The congregation that worships weekly becomes reverent. The one that neglects worship becomes secular. Religion without habit would fade into sentiment. With habit, it becomes the deepest reality. The saints are they who have habituated themselves to holiness, until every thought and act runs in sacred grooves. The skeptic is he who has habituated himself to doubt, until faith is impossible. Thus religion, like morality, rests upon the law of habit. And the responsibility of shaping habits in the religious sphere is as solemn as in the moral. For each prayer uttered, each worship performed, strengthens the grooves of piety, while each neglect weakens them. It is sometimes asked whether habit does not destroy freedom, whether a man who acts habitually is truly moral. The answer is that freedom lies not in acting without habit, but in choosing which habits we shall form. The act of choice is free, the habit is its consequence. We cannot remain free in the sense of perpetual choice, for that would be weakness, not liberty. The man who must deliberate every time he tells the truth is less free than the man who tells it habitually, for the former is in bondage to indecision. True freedom is the freedom to form good habits, and then to let them run of themselves. Habit does not destroy morality, it makes it possible. Without it, we should be creatures of whim. With it, we are creatures of character. And character is freedom embodied. The ultimate lesson, then, is that habit is the very essence of morality and society. It is the foundation of virtue, the cement of law, the guarantee of religion, the bond of community. Without it, there would be no character in man and no order in society. With it, both man and society are stable, reliable, trustworthy. The responsibility of forming habits, therefore, is the highest responsibility we bear, both for ourselves and for others. Each act is a stroke of the chisel, carving grooves that will endure. Each repetition is the deepening of a furrow that will guide our future and the future of our children. We cannot escape this responsibility, we can only fulfill it well or ill. If we form good habits, we bless ourselves and society. If we form bad habits, we curse both. Habit is the law of life, and upon our obedience to it hangs the destiny of men and nations. The survey of habit would be incomplete if we did not draw from it practical lessons for the conduct of life. Philosophy is barren unless it returns to practice, and the laws of habit are not mere curiosities of psychology, but rules of destiny. For every man is the sum of his habits, every society the fabric of its customs, every morality the crystallization of repeated acts. To know the laws by which habits are formed and broken is to hold in our hands the key to character, the instrument of self-improvement, the secret of destiny itself. It is not enough to admire the grandeur of the law. We must apply it to our own lives, shaping ourselves and others by its inexorable demands. The first practical rule is this: launch yourself with as strong and decisive an initiative as possible into the line of conduct you desire to adopt. In the formation of a habit, the first act is critical. The nervous system, still plastic, receives its first impression with a force that subsequent repetitions deepen. If the first act is weak, hesitant, half-hearted, the groove will be shallow, the habit feeble. But if the first act is strong, complete, decisive, the groove will be deep, the habit vigorous. Therefore, when beginning a new habit, put forth your whole strength, resist compromise, avoid half measures. The youth who determines to rise early must not indulge himself with delays, but must rise at the appointed moment with full resolve. The man who determines to abandon drink must not sip occasionally, but must abstain utterly from the first. For every indulgence weakens the initiative, every lapse makes the new groove harder to form. Strike while the iron is hot, for the first blow is the heaviest. The second rule is never suffer an exception to occur until the new habit is securely rooted. Each exception is like a wedge driven into the groove of the old habit, each indulgence a return to the path of least resistance. Nothing is more fatal than the idea that a single lapse does no harm. It does harm, for it reinforces the very tendency we are trying to overcome. The man who is breaking with intemperance and allows himself a single indulgence is like one who rolls a stone uphill and lets it slip back. He must roll again from the bottom. The man who resolves to be punctual and allows himself a single delay weakens his whole resolution. The law of habit tolerates no exceptions until the new groove is worn deep enough to be automatic. Until then, vigilance must be absolute, for the danger of relapse is ever present. When the new habit is firmly established, occasional exceptions may not destroy it, but until then, they are fatal. The third rule is seize the very first possible opportunity to act on every resolution you make, on every emotional prompting you experience in the direction of the habits you aspire to gain. Resolutions without action are like seeds without planting, they wither and die. The emotion that stirs us must be embodied in immediate conduct, else it evaporates. The man who feels the inspiration to generosity must give at once, or the inspiration will pass unused. The student who resolves to study must open his book at once, or the resolve will fade. The soul is like the soil. The seed of resolution must be buried in the act before it can germinate. Delay is the death of good intentions, action their life. Every time we act upon a resolution, we deepen its groove. Every time we fail, we weaken it. Therefore, let no emotion go to waste, but translate it instantly into deed. The fourth rule is keep the faculty of effort alive by a little gratuitous exercise every day. The will, like the muscles, grows by use and decays by disuse. If we always follow the path of least resistance, if we always yield to ease, if we never compel ourselves to do what is hard, our power of effort weakens until we are slaves of impulse. But if we daily compel ourselves to do something difficult, something against inclination, something requiring effort, we strengthen the habit of effort, the very core of willpower. It need not be a great act. It may be rising promptly when the alarm rings, refraining from indulgence in some pleasure, undertaking some distasteful task. the point is not the act but the exercise of effort. The man who trains himself in little self-denials will be ready for great ones. The man who never denies himself in trifles will fail in crisis. Keep the will alive by daily gymnastic of effort, and you will be strong when strength is required. The fifth rule is do not preach too much to young people about what they should do, but set the example yourself. Habits are more caught than taught. Imitation is stronger than exhortation. The child who sees his parents punctual, orderly, truthful, industrious, will form those habits more surely than if he hears sermons about them. The teacher who enforces discipline by his own accuracy and fairness will create habits of accuracy and fairness in his pupils. The leader who lives nobly will inspire noble habits in his followers. Words are weak. Examples are strong. Habits are contagious. The responsibility of elders is thus enormous, for their habits become the models of the young, their grooves the grooves of the future. No preaching can undo the mischief of bad example. No exhortation can equal the power of good example. The law of habit is a law of imitation, and society transmits its life less by words than by practices. The sixth rule is keep the young occupied with habits that leave no room for the bad ones. Idleness is the mother of vice, because the nervous system abhors a vacuum. If the grooves of good habit are not formed, those of bad habit will form of themselves. The idle child becomes mischievous, the idle youth becomes dissipated, the idle man becomes vicious. The remedy is not merely to forbid the bad, but to enforce the good, to fill life with useful acts until they become habitual. Occupation is the safeguard of virtue, work the ally of morality. The man who is industrious has little temptation to vice, for his grooves of labor exclude those of indulgence. Education must therefore not only teach but keep busy, not only forbid but supply, not only prevent but provide. The best way to destroy a bad habit is to replace it with a good one, to divert the currents into new channels, to occupy the soil with wholesome plants lest weeds grow. The seventh rule is understand that habits once formed become destiny. Every act of indulgence, every lapse of duty, every neglect of effort writes itself into the nervous system, engraving grooves that will guide the future. No act is lost, no effort wasted, no lapse without consequence. The child who neglects study is not merely wasting an hour, he is engraving the habit of neglect. The youth who indulges vice is not merely enjoying a moment, he is engraving the habit of vice. The man who practices virtue is not merely performing a duty, he is engraving the habit of virtue. Each day adds to the grooves, each year deepens them, until at last character is fixed, destiny sealed. Life is solemn because it is cumulative, because every act counts, because habit never forgets. We may repent, but the nervous system remembers. We may resolve, but the grooves remain. We may reform, but the struggle is terrible. Destiny is but the shadow of habit, and habit is formed by acts. These practical rules are not fanciful, but grounded in the very constitution of our being. The physiologist shows us that the nervous system is plastic, that it grows to the modes in which it is exercised, that it resists change once formed. The psychologist shows us that acts repeated become easier, that tendencies once begun perpetuate themselves, that associations once made recur. The moralist shows us that virtue is but habit organized, that vice is but habit misdirected, that character is but habit crystallized. The religious teacher shows us that holiness is but habit sanctified, that sin is but habit debased. All unite in proclaiming the same truth, that the secret of life lies in habit, and that our destiny is in our daily acts. The reflections that follow from this are grave and inspiring. Grave, because they show us how perilous is every act, how tremendous is the responsibility of choice, how inevitable is the law of consequence. Inspiring, because they show us that greatness is possible for all, that virtue is within reach of the humblest, that holiness is but the persistence of effort, that genius itself is but talent cultivated by habit. We need not wait for sudden inspiration, for miraculous transformation, for mysterious gifts. We need only to act daily in the direction of our ideals, to repeat our efforts, to engrave our grooves, and the miracle will come of itself. Character will be formed, virtue will be secure, destiny will be noble. In the end, then, habit is the great law of life, the flywheel of society, the ballast of character, the cement of morality, the guarantee of religion. It conserves energy, economizes effort, secures constancy, ensures progress. It binds the present to the past, the individual to the race to the universe. It is at once the instrument of freedom and the agent of bondage, offering us liberty in the beginning, enslaving us afterward. It is the law which makes education possible, morality real, society stable, civilization enduring. It is the law which turns impulses into principles, choices into character, acts into destiny. Let us then take it seriously, reverence it, obey it. Let us form good habits with care, resist bad ones with vigilance, train the young with patience, discipline ourselves with perseverance. Let us remember that we are not only making ourselves, but making society. Not only shaping our own destiny, but shaping the destiny of generations. Let us remember that every act is a stone in the edifice of character, that every habit is a pillar in the temple of life, that every day is a chisel stroke upon the marble of destiny. If we do this, we shall live wisely, nobly, securely. For in the end, as William James has said, our character is nothing but the total of our habits, and our habits are nothing but our lives repeated.